Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei become a harem god? Part 1. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Prologue. Mrs. Haruka Haidu was not a generally happy woman. 3 times. That was how many times she had tried and failed. That was the number of times that she and her husband had had their hopes and dreams raised and elevated and then promptly squashed, crashing like an egg placed in the hands of a hyperactive infant. Despite how much her husband claimed that it was not her fault and how his calm, understanding gazes had assured her that he would love her unconditionally, even if she never got a child, there was a part of her that felt inadequate. She had felt broken, toyed with. She perceived her status as a woman to have been lessened by her inability to successfully bring and retain life into the world. They had momentarily considered adoption, yet, she knew, deep within her, no matter how much of a bad person it made her feel, that she would not be able to love an adopted child in the same manner she would her own flesh and blood. She would not be able to stare into the child's eyes without being reminded of her harsh failures at her own childbearing attempts. So, she had tried once more. And then, she had succeeded. The nurses of Harem Central Hospital would go on to claim that they had never met parents who had cried so much upon finally having a child. They had never seen a pair who had so completely and honestly displayed their joy, their sorrows, their grief, their passion, and their love. As such, Haruka had seen it fitting to name her son after that moment. His name will be Issei, to mean, honestly. As such, the child had grown, and Haruka would not deny that she and her husband had spoiled their son to no small amount. They let him have most of what he wanted, most of what he needed. They read to him bedtime stories, bought him the best clothes and toys that they could afford, and with the 3 of them, their life was absolutely complete. Haruka loved her son. She loved him more than anything else, more than anyone else, and strange as it was, she loved her son even more than she loved her own husband. The bond between mother and child was such that was inexplicable, it was something great and pure, and she ensured that she would see her child grow up to become the very best person that he could be. She had lost 3 prior children, 3 prior lives that would have been grown to be kind-hearted doctors or surgeons, or to be brilliant scientific minds, or to go on and become great, fantastic novelists and writers. As such, Haruka had decided that she wanted her child, her first and only son, to be the very best individual he could be. She wouldn't force him down any path, oh heavens no, she loved him far too much for that to happen. Rather, she slowly began to cultivate different talents within him. Getting him a mini painter's kit, a small children's science lab, a collection of entertaining child books about anatomy and science and history. She wanted her little boy to be anything he wanted to be. However, nothing had prepared her for the words he would declare to her one day when asked that ever-curious question. "I want to be a harem king." She had stared, baffled, eyes blinking at the sheer ludicrousness of the statement, despite the fact that her son had seemed so resolute and determined when making the declaration. Her lips had crinkled into a small, slightly uncomfortable smile as she had heard his words. It was ridiculous, she had thought. It was an unrealistic, unattainable goal, and one which was extremely inappropriate for a child to have. It could even be considered as a somewhat chauvinistic male fantasy to attain a collection of women in which to use and exchange as easily as removing a pair of briefs from the bottom drawer of a closet. Of course, she knew that he got this from her husband. Her husband had once possessed such a dream during his more youthful, exuberant years, but she never imagined that her son would have something like that implanted into his mind. Still, she hadn't utterly dismissed the idea, nor had she immediately made clear her disapproval, because Haruka Haidu was a smart woman, and she knew that telling someone they couldn't do something would only make them want to do it out of spite or childish vehemence. So instead, she kindly, softly, and as gently as she could, uttered 3 simple words. And then what? She had then watched as he deflated like a popped balloon at a kindergarten birthday party. She smiled. "What would you do after you become a harem king, Issei-chan?" The energetic brown-haired child had perked up. "Then I'll get to fondle all the breasts I want." Her eye had twitched slightly at the statement, but she was not deterred, as she asked again. "And then what?" He blinked for a moment. "What do you mean, Ka-chan? Let's say you eventually become a harem king and you get to fondle all the breasts you want. What would you do then, when you get tired of fondling breasts?" He rose his nose up in disbelief and distaste. "I'll never get tired of breasts." Haruka had not rebuked him then. Instead, she had taken a more practical approach. For the next 2 weeks, all he ate was his favorite food, the food he loved immensely, the one in which he would often claim was all he would eat if given the chance. The 2 weeks were barely up when he had turned green at the sight of the meal when it was placed in front of his face. He was a child, young and impressionable, but it was not hard for even him to connect the dots. If, in less than 2 weeks, he had grown sick of the one thing he loved to eat much more than anything else, what were the odds that he would never get tired of breasts? It could take a month, or it could take a year, but there would reach a point in which he would grow tired of it. And then what? What would happen then? What would become of his dream? What would become of him? These were rather heavy questions for a child, rather hefty ones to ask of someone so young, but Haruka was a woman who would not allow her one and only child waste his life by chasing after some unrealistic unattainable fantasy of becoming a harem king. Tell you what, Issei-chan, I won't tell you not to chase your dream of becoming a harem king, but before you do, why not try to become something like a doctor, or maybe even a lawyer, or I know an astronaut. You could get to fly out and explore space and stars, Issei-kun, maybe even meet some tiny green men. Really? Are there little tiny green men out there, Ka-chan? She pinched his cheek softly and placed her nose on his, rubbing their noses together in a manner that made him laugh. That's for you to go out there and find out, my little Issei-chan. Go out there and do something, anything, that fulfills you, so whenever you ask yourself and then what, you will always have the answer. Soon after that, a young boy's budding obsession with breasts and the womanly form were slowly substituted by an obsession with the sciences, chemistry and physics. A growing fascination for girls was slowly switched by an immense fascination for philosophy, music and the arts. She knew that there was a part of him that still possessed those slightly perverted tendencies, but the part was minor enough to be considered just a level or two beyond normal juvenile fantasies, instead of delusions of grandeur. Thus, the words harem king were never heard in the Haidu household ever again. Haruka had felt satisfied that she had sent her son down the right path. She had felt happier knowing that he had a much brighter future ahead of him. Then, when the straight-A report cards began piling up on the refrigerator as teachers called her to heap high praise on the intellectual prowess of her little boy, she had glowed absolutely with pride. Yet, as she watched as little Issei began to spend less and less time around his peers and more time in his room studying, and as his moments at the family table grew scarce as the library had slowly become his second home, and she watched as her son's closest friend, Irina, had become an infrequent face as their different interests drifted them apart, she couldn't help but feel that she had made a horrible mistake. You know, dear, this still feels all too surreal. Haruka Haidu could only nod slightly, a small smile gracing her lips as her husband sat beside her and as her hands went out to his, grasping the drink in his hand. Iced tea? He hummed. Just as you like it, dear. She collected the drink, feeling the cold plastic send shivers down her hand as the object was wet with precipitation. Cold droplets of water stained the outside, as did tiny, near inconspicuous wisps of vapor. Too cold? She gave a grimacing smile. Just a tad bit, dear. Considering the air conditioning in here. Her husband, Nomura Haidu, tilted his head slightly in understanding before a smile graced his face. Well, you know, these hotshot scientists need a way to cool down, otherwise their brains would be steaming all the time. She rolled her eyes and tapped him playfully. Shush, dear. Don't let any of them hear you. He waved her off, a relaxed grin on his half-bearded face. Bah. What are they gonna do? Kick me out? My 10-year-old son is up on their podium, schooling their best professors and scientists. I think I'm allowed some level of cheek. She immediately pinched the side of his cheek. And I'll grab your cheeks if you do anything here that'll embarrass Ice-chan. He's worked very hard to reach here. The grown man immediately pouted, his lips forming into a kitten innocent facade. That's so mean, Haruka-chan. You know I'd never do anything that would show badly on Ice-chan. Haruka's lips twitched. Not intentionally, no. Nomura immediately winced. I told you, dear, that thing with the panda bears was completely not my fault. Excuse me? A stern voice said, immediately cutting both of them off. The couple turned to the attention of the voice, finding in place a blonde-haired, bespectacled young woman with an immensely serious gaze which was cutting straight into them. Oh, see what you've caused, dear. We've been disturbing the people who came to listen to Ice-chan. Nomura gave an apologetic laugh. Ah, I can't help it, you know. What man can remain quiet and solemn around the woman he loves? Oh shush, dear, your flattery won't help you out this time. Haruka turned to the woman, don't mind us, we're just here to make sure we pick up our son after he's done. We're not exactly the scientific type, as you can see clearly. Nomura nodded in an exaggerated solemn manner. I don't understand half of the things people here say, and I don't even understand what this entire conference is for. The blonde woman merely rose an eyebrow. Your son? You are here to pick up your son? Haruka nodded, with a long sigh. Ice-chan already knows how to drive, despite being so young, he picked it up without anyone even showing him. But of course, he's too young to have a license, so we're just here to root him on, and then pick him up at the end. I thought we were going to branch the ice cream parlor afterwards, dear. Ice-chan loves ice cream. No dear, you love ice cream, Ice-chan just barely likes it. Ice? The blonde woman said, pausing as in, Haidu Issei. That Haidu Issei. The one who's… Ah, look dear. I think he's done. Haruka's eyes flickered across the enormous chamber, filled to the brim with numerous seats and individuals, clearly wearing the colors of their respective universities and colleges, and other such individuals in elegant suits or lab coats that displayed, in one measure or another, their extravagant wealth, class, or prestige. Then, in the center of the auditorium, there stood a small 10-year-old boy, standing on an elevated platform, with a black Pikachu. "I choose you." T-shirt, a pair of plain jean shorts, some brown sandals, and a red baseball cap. He looked completely out of place in the gathering, as though he were the odd object out of a Find the Difference game. Yet, his gaze was happy poised, his smile was perky smart, and his entire posture screamed, "I belong here." And that concludes my paper on the latent micro-radioactive energy potential in the atmosphere. Any questions? Immediately, there was a heavy cacophony of yells, a large clamor as hands immediately shot up into the air, all of them eager, some more than others, to have their curiosities sated, their questions answered, their problems and thoughts alleviated. The boy in question let out a large smile. "I can only take 3 questions for now please, my parents need to take me home before it's past my bedtime." There was a general symphony of well-meaning laughter. "Alright, you, the cool-looking Gigi in the sweet suit." The old man in question immediately leaped to his feet, smiling broadly. "Professor Nakamura, Department of Physics, Tokyo University." The man said, introducing himself. "I only have a rather simple question for you, Haidu-kun." Issei nodded. "Sure thing. Your theory proposes that there exists form of ambient energy in the atmosphere, one, which allows for great manipulation of natural occurring elements down to their smallest cellular constituents, therefore making it possible to perform normally implausible feats like conjuring fire from thin air or aiding in advanced cellular regeneration." Once more, the small boy nodded. "Do you believe that the energy could be harnessed? Used?" The boy interrupted and the man blinked before nodding. "Of course. It will take a while, but I've started work on a device which would be capable of identifying and quantifying the energy, the forms it takes, and I'll eventually begin experimenting to see if the energy is safe enough to be used by carbon-based life forms." There was a loud range of interested murmurs and curious expressions. "Yes, you, next question." Dr. Mariwaka, Kyoto University. "So does that mean that one day, humans will be able to conjure fire as though it was out of thin air, or use this latent energy to boost physical attributes?" The boy smiled. "I believe that this energy will redefine what it means to be human." The interested murmurs grew to a level of immense excitement and intrigue. "Just one more question please, any other inquiries can be made on an online platform." Haruka Haidu had watched the proceedings with her mind barely able to wrap around anything that was going on, until the woman behind her had eventually raised her arm up. "Yes, the pretty-looking lady behind my parents. Rajni Agar's Cool University." The woman said, her voice coming out rather plain. "I simply have one question." Issei, in his exuberance, turned his baseball cap around in an expression of seriousness that only made him look more endearing, causing a small wave of giggles and laughter. "Do you believe in the supernatural?" All at once, the entire auditorium fell relatively silent. I'm sorry, Agarison, I don't understand how my belief has anything to do with my paper." "The energy source you mentioned," she said briskly, cutting him off. "The energy source that you claim is something of a radioactive nature that allows for impossible feats. What if I told you it is magic?" The auditorium's silence peaked until, all at once, there was a large wave of rancorous laughter. "Did you hear the girl? Magic, she says. What in the world are they teaching those fools at Cool University? Next thing we know, they'll be telling us about fairies and elves. Oh, and witches. Ooh. Scary witches." Although everyone was laughing, the laughter came to a slow stop as the gathered congregation looked unto the form of the 10-year-old boy and they noticed that he was not laughing. Instead, his eyes were perfectly crinkled into one of immense concentration. "I don't believe in magic." The 5 words came out, each syllable more emphasized than the preceding one. "Because you have yet to find any scientific evidence in favor of it." "No," he said, shaking his head and causing no small amount of confusion. "I'm pretty sure we all know the phrase. Any sufficiently advanced level of technology is indistinguishable from magic." There was some positive murmuring. The boy, smiling, then asked who is to say that the reverse is not also the case. The auditorium was silent. "Hypothetically, a time-traveling adventurer from the 30th century arrives today. He sees you have a problem in which you invited a date to the homecoming dance and don't own a vehicle or have money to rent one. He then takes you to a restaurant, has you select your favorite meal, and then he points at it with his finger. Then, before your very eyes, it turns into a fully sentient 80-foot-tall reptilian creature with wings and says you may ride on it to your destination." The boy's eyes were clear, but they were sharp, even as the smile on his face never faded. "You would call him a sorcerer. I would call him an accomplished scientist. And the common man?" He grinned. "They would call him a god. Present day." "Issei-kun, I need some help in the kitchen." The young man found himself groaning in slight annoyance at the yells that came from above him. His time in the lab was supposed to be his time of solace and away from any sorts of distractions because the work that he did in here was extremely delicate. To his left, a fully fitted and equipped science laboratory kit was present, with a vial of greenish liquid burning silently over a Bunsen burner. To his right, there were charts and diagrams of human anatomical figures and models, complete with a table and dissection equipment that sheened as they had recently been used, cleaned and sterilized. To his front was a workstation filled with numerous different gadgets, nuts, bolts, screws, and other such electrical and mechanical appliances. The boy stood in front of the station, a pair of glasses in his hand which he slowly and methodologically tinkered with, as the lenses were a dark shade of green, and he used a small screwdriver to adjust the nuts and bolts on it. He finished, satisfied with his work, before he brought up his smartphone. Kiki, begin recording invention 374-1.6. Omni Vision Goggles, Test 31. His smartphone immediately lit up with a perky voice. Hi. Recording in process, Issei-sama. Gently, the boy grabbed the glasses and then put them on, before clicking a button at the side and watching as they strapped firmly to his ears before they faded away. Cloaking capabilities are fully functional under room temperatures in standard conditions. Still requires test under high and low pressure environments and high and low temperature environments. The boy let out a small breath before tapping a button at the side of the invisible glasses. Immediately, his vision lit up with numerous numbers and statistical data. Omni Vision glasses vector calculation arithmetic seems to be fully functional. I can effectively calculate humidity, wind direction and speed, and temperature of objects in atmosphere. Then, he tapped another button once more, which, to the casual observer, would appear as though he was simply tapping the side of his head. Night vision capabilities are functional. Thermal vision capabilities are functional. X-ray vision capabilities are. At that moment, the door burst open. Young man, I called you to help me out in the kitchen. Abort. Abort. Code. Oedipus. I repeat, code. Oedipus. Veruca Haidu could only stare blandly as a blinding flash seemed to appear out of nowhere, and then, a pair of glasses dropped from Issei's eyes, which immediately appeared bright red and puffy. All she could do was raise one eyebrow at his swollen eyes that clearly looked like they hurt. I regret nothing. She sighed. Dinner's by 7. How long is it going to take you to fix up your eyes? He paused. A while. Which I assume is probably just long enough for you to skip out on family game night again. He immediately bowed his head. An unfortunate happenstance. Her right eye twitched. Not unfortunate enough it seems. I cannot be blamed if I chose to blind myself rather than to endure the trauma of seeing my mother's naked body. Big words coming from someone who used to lunge his lips for my breasts anytime I held him in my hands. I was an infant. We were 10. Issei opened his mouth to give a retort before closing it shut. Issei-sama, should I continue recording? Please do, Kiki-chan. I would love to have this tape played the next time Issei-kun thinks he can get clever with me. Issei groaned. Oh, don't you give me that, young man. I'm amazed you could create a robot as amazing as Kiki-chan. She's not a robot, Ka-chan, she's an ultra-advanced artificial intelligence program with pseudo-godlike control over all forms of technology, and she still has the most pleasant personality. I'm sure if Kiki-chan had a body, she'd be more than happy to help her old, frail mother in the kitchen. Issei's swollen, semi-blind left eye twitched. You're not old and frail, and I'm saying this at the risk of being classified with an Oedipus complex, young and hot, which is precisely why I'd rather blind myself than see you naked. And whose fault is that, mister? I never want to see you two get old. Issei's swollen, semi-blind right eye twitched. I was 12, and the aging inhibition formula I slipped into you and 2 cents T is completely intent-based. It enables your thought processes to be converted into rapid cell acceleration, like flexing a muscle. That means you can grow older if you want to. Veruca smirked. Her young features looking as though she was a woman in her mid-20s and one who was attractive enough to turn heads around the street multiple times. And why exactly would I want to do that? Your father and I are the happiest we've ever been, and the sex has been just. La 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 la, not listening, la 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 la. She rolled her eyes. Oh please, I've seen you perform autopsies on brutalized corpses without batting an eyelash, and somehow you regress back to an infant whenever I mention my bedroom activities with your father. Issei gave her a straight look, which was somewhat funny because of how puffy and swollen his eyes were. Ka-chan, in my infinite pursuit of all forms of knowledge of the world and the universe, to discover the meaning to life and the purpose of existence, nowhere in there does that call for me knowing or picturizing the concept of my parents involved in sexual activities. Veruca sighed. There you go again. You always revert back to using fancier terms and language whenever you get defensive. I'm not defensive, I just don't want to know what my mother does in the bedroom. Though that's not the crux of the matter, and we both know it. You always get defensive whenever I talk about things like getting a girlfriend, or sex, or going out to meet people your own age. He snorted. People my own age are hormonal-driven idiots. Sex is a time-wasting activity which consumes a great deal of energy and requires a ridiculously stupid level of openness in exchange for a rush of oxytocin, dopamine and other biological chemicals that the brain interprets as pleasure, and I do have a girlfriend Kiki. I didn't know we were a couple Issei-sama. That's great. Haruka sighed. You're becoming a hikikomori Issei-kun. Issei balked. What? Just because I decided that it's a waste of my time to go outside and communicate with 90% of the human population that are made up of fickle-minded, prejudiced and ignorant people doesn't mean I'm becoming a shut-in. Haruka crossed her arms. Oh come on Ka-chan. You know how it is with me, I don't get normal people. They worry over the most insignificant things, do the most asinine things, they fail to plot their time and spend their lives drifting aimlessly from one day to the next in a set pattern of dull meaningless actions that serve no further purpose than to fill a blankness and numb the sensation of time passing. Then they have the gall to call this facade living. The woman shook her head. Alright, that's it Issei-kun. I'm not going to allow you to spend the rest of your life in here alone. Issei, despite his eyes still swollen, blinked. Huh? Kiki shut down and lock up Issei-kun's lab and leave only the things he needs to fix his eyes available. The brown-haired boy let out a laugh. Nice try Ka-chan, but Kiki requires a long complicated master control code in order for you to give that command. Not even the CIA or MI6 would be able to crack the full, extremely randomized passphrase that would leave their best and brightest a sniveling, sobbing mess on the cold floor. There is no way in the world you could. Code phrase. I masturbated to Irina's pictures after realizing she was a girl. Passcode accepted. Commencing lockdown. Issei stared. Kiki you traitor. Sorry, Issei-sama. I told you that in confidentiality. Haruka merely gave a satisfied smile as she watched the lab fold and compress on itself into numerous different vaults. I think it's cute that you have a crush on Irina-chan. Maybe you should go see her. Go explore your fleeting youth. I created a formula capable of stopping the aging process when I was 12. My youth is anything but fleeting. I can't believe I'm flying to England. Issei said with a grumble to himself as he had a pair of large headphones which were placed on his head but which were not playing any music however and were instead placed there as a means to be able to legitimately ignore people under the guise of listening to music. However, he was using it at the moment to make a call. Oh relax Issei-kun. It's been what, 7, 8 years since you last met Irina-chan? I think she'll still remember you. He rolled his eyes. No, I meant, I can't believe I'm literally flying to England. If you hadn't locked down my lab, I'd have grabbed my teleportation belt and I'd be there already. No. No fancy go-go gadgets with you Issei-kun. You always get distracted when you're with them. I do not. It was that time in Brazil. I just made a tiny detour. You went in search of the lost city of El Dorado. Okay, so not exactly a tiny detour. And what about the time in Hawaii? I wasn't distracted, I did get in the water with you and Dad didn't I? Yes, until you decided to go searching for the lost city of Atlantis. It felt like a good idea at the time. And let's not forget what happened while we were in London. Issei winced. Yeah, we were almost barred from ever returning to the UK, weren't we? Well, considering that a little Japanese boy mistook the Queen's extravagant pleasuring tool for the sword of King Arthur, it was too realistic. It wasn't my fault for making that mistake. And the Queen is old. How was I supposed to know she still used something like that? My point Issei-kun is that misadventures seem to gravitate towards you whenever you're with your equipment. This time around, you're going simply to see a longtime friend and then perhaps to hit it off with her, find love and have sex, and then give me some nice beautiful grandchildren. Issei took in a deep sigh. Ka-chan, I think you keep forgetting that I'm 16. Normal 16-year-olds don't have sex. Normal 16-year-olds also don't have 12 PhDs and 36 MDs. 37. He corrected automatically before coughing into his hands, but that's not exactly the same thing. Besides, isn't Irina supposed to be a nun or something? Or a woman of the church? She's probably taken an oath to chastity. Well, some oaths were just made to be broken. Issei's fully healed left eye twitched. You're a horrible corrupting influence Ka-chan. I love you too Issei-kun. The boy let out a full breathed sigh before his ears picked up something on the other side. Wait Ka-chan, did you decide to send me to England to find Irina just so you and Toussaint could have sex everywhere in the house without me around to make things awkward? No. Issei rubbed his nose in irritation. Disconnect call. The teen prodigy sighed as he got up to his feet and then stretched as well as he could before he eventually looked over to the time and he realized that his flight would be in an hour. Really inconvenient. Fastest method of transportation my ass. This has to rank amongst one of the stupidest thing I have ever done. Issei sighed to himself as he stood outside of Heathrow International Airport. He slowly rubbed his palm across his face as his luggage was ludicrously light, consisting only of a small backpack which was slung across his back. His clothes were such in a manner that they would not seem out of place in a teen fashion magazine. Which was actually true because his mother had been the one to buy them for him and she had picked them straight out of a teen fashion magazine. With skinny jeans and sneakers and a hoodie because London was cold, he would make for a rather attractive sight. If he was not repetitively slapping his palm into his face. Oh, I know, I'll just drop by her house and say hey. I haven't seen you in over 8 years. My mother found out that I once masturbated to a picture of you and she thinks I have a crush on you, so she sent me halfway across the world so we can have sex. He sighed before immediately bringing up his smartphone. Alright Kiki, I'm removing you from timeout. I don't appreciate you telling Kos and the passcode, but I suppose these things happen. Yay. Thank you Issei-sama. He rolled his eyes. Damn, he was a real softie. Alright. Now scan the local databases, phone records, addresses, contact information, social media platforms, and hijack the global satellites and street cams if need be. Find anything you can find on Arena Shidu. You don't know her address Issei-sama. It's been 8 years. She could have moved. His phone gave a brief beep. Found her Issei-sama. I know I didn't give you a 1024 petabyte RAM for nothing. So, where is she? She seems to be leaving the secret headquarters of the Ordo Hermeticus Ori Aurea. Issei blinked. Come again? It's Latin for. Yes, I know it's Latin for the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and I know what the Golden Dawn is. My concern is 1. They should have gone extinct since 1903, and 2. Irina is a member of the church. What is she doing visiting one of the largest single influences of Western occultism? I have gained access to their camera databases Issei-sama. Would you like to see? You know me too well Kiki. The image on the screen immediately went to that of a large elegant room and in no time at all, Issei was able to spot the chestnut-haired girl that was his childhood friend. Except, what in the world is she wearing? And is that assorted her hips? Arena Shidu stood across from a tall man with dark blonde hair and an intimidating physique. Though I understand your concern, I assure you, we of the Golden Dawn have nothing to do with the missing Excalibur fragments. Arena smiled before sighing. Thanks. Sorry for the inconvenience, but the Archbishop asked to check if Caliburn and Excalibur ruler were safe. The man snarled. They have been taken away by Arthur. Foolish young brat probably went off in search of some type of adventure. His sister is here, still scuttling uneasily around the halls, and it is clear she wishes to join her brother and leave ingrates, the both of them. Ah okay. Again, sorry to waste your time. May the blessings of the good Lord visit you. Issei stared at his phone screen as it went blank, as the video feed had effectively been cut off. The silence continued, even as people passed him by on the road, and he merely continued to stare at his blank phone. Issei-sama, did you know that there is a House of Pendragon in London? His entire body was absolutely rigid, but he was still able to utter a single word. What? I am perusing through local databases Issei-sama. The MI6 computers have records of a House of Pendragon, and this House of Pendragon seems to be under the protection or influence of the Golden Dawn. He brought up his hands and immediately started massaging his temples. You're joking. The Arthurian legends are just that, legends. King Arthur never existed, the Excalibur never existed. There is a perfectly logical explanation for all of this. Issei-sama. Her tone came out completely low. There are official documents, the Excalibur, it exists, and that's not all that exists. Haidu Issei would have made for quite the sight as his eyes rapidly perused his handheld device, his eyes going wider and wider in disbelief, in skepticism, even as the photographic evidence was before him, of golden-winged figures, of bat-winged figures, of dark-winged figures, even as what looked like undoubtable evidence seemed to prove the terrors of the night, and they proved the existence of concepts that he had long since discarded in the name of them being mere fantasy. Issei immediately took in several deep breaths. Okay, let's say, hypothetically, devils and angels exist, as do ghosts and creatures of other mythologies. What does that mean? Well, it means that heaven and hell is equally real, souls are real, and that there really is a God. Issei-sama. Except, how then the universe come into creation? If there are numerous gods, which one was responsible for the creation of the universe? Did they all create it together and then share themselves amongst the people of the earth when it was suitably populated? Or did one being create it all, and then the rest merely came into existence afterwards? Issei-sama. That is of course, assuming that they are actually gods. Think Haidu, you are the one who stated that any sufficiently advanced form of technology is indistinguishable from magic. What if these beings are not supernatural or magical, but merely other humanoid-based life forms that grew believing themselves as creatures of myth? What if all gods are merely an advanced alien civilization who have learned to harness physics and chemistry in manners that humanity is not? What if the Christian God is really just a being from an advanced race or time, and all his feats or miracles are mere scientific achievements, but they are far too complex for my mind to unravel as science? Issei-sama. What? All at once, Issei's mind was drawn to the sound of whirling alarms and screeching tires. The MI6 discovered I was hacking their databases and they're here to arrest you. I just discovered that gods could possibly exist and you want me to worry about MI6 agents," he said, sounding baffled. "Unless one of them has the last name Bond, I honestly don't think that's a priority right now. So what are we going to do, Issei-sama?" The boy dragged down his sleeves and put on a pair of white rubber gloves. "What we always do, Kiki." He pulled his hoodie up and wrapped a green bandana across his face. Dazzle and baffle. Then, he added a pair of thick shades to completely obscure his face. "Always. Freeze. My name is Harry Potter and I demand to meet with the Queen of England. Dead on the ground or we will open fire. Avada Kedavra. For Voldemort." With eyewitness reports claiming rather vividly that the man had called himself Harry Potter and had immediately incapacitated some of Britain's best and brightest by "I'm sorry what?" He gave them erections. Even the women. How does that make any sense? And the manhunt for the elusive terrorist Harry Potter goes on this evening, ever since the mysterious man made his display at Heathrow International, in which he left the scene with mad screams of the killing curse and with trousers feeling slightly too tight for comfort. And today's top story. England gets hard for Harry Potter. It is a sad day indeed for all of England when the name of one of its most famous fictional characters that has warmed his way into our hearts is now being used in acts of terror and destruction and sexual debauchery. Alright, that's enough, Kiki. Cut off the local news feeds, I think I've had my fun," a young 16-year-old boy said to empty air as he walked down the streets of London. He had his smartphone out in front of his face and he let out a long tired yawn as he craned his neck to the side, doing it in a manner that delivered a comfortable crack. "As interesting as it is messing with the British Secret Service and all, I have more important things to do. Gods, devils, angels, I need more information on all of this." His smartphone gave an affirmative beep. "I have reintegrated myself back into the MI6 computers, Issei-sama. By tracking my initial hack, I was able to install a backdoor program that enables me total undetected controls of their systems. That's my girl." "What did you find?" It seems that most high-ranking officials in the government and bureaucracies of the world are aware about the existence of the supernatural, in one way or another. Some of them even have notable contracts with high-ranking devils. Issei rubbed his nose. "Devils. Hi, Issei-sama. The President of America, for instance, is assumed to be in a contract with Lucifer, and the royal family of England, the Queen in particular, is in a contract with the Leviathan. There was a general unspoken agreement not to make this information public. There was an accord of this, but I am afraid that the information on the MI6 computers do not quite specify. Should I hack the Pentagon instead to retrieve more information, Issei-sama?" Issei slowly rubbed his temples around his head. When he had set out to England on the whims of his mother, he was ready for pretty much anything. He was ready for Irina to slam a door in his face, or for her to call the police on him, or for an awkward situation arriving due to a lack of common ground and suitable topics of conversation, as they came to the disappointing realization that a brief childhood friendship was an empty facsimile that could not withstand the test of time and the growth of the individuals. Except, he had not been expecting to discover that Irina was some sort of secret agent for the Anglican, or was it Methodist? Or Pentecostal? Or Adventist? Church. There was also the fact that nothing had quite prepared him to come to terms with the knowledge that there were beings out in the world who called themselves supernatural. Issei scoffed out loud. "Is something wrong, Issei-sama? Gods? Devils? Angels? Ghosts? Spirits? I call bullshit. Total and complete bullshit. Issei-sama. It is more likely to believe that these creatures are alien lifeforms that migrated to Earth and ultimately, primitive humans, being unable to classify them as beings from an unknown and advanced civilization, decided to attribute their status to that of beings of myth, legend and folklore." The boy began pacing, walking left, right, forward and backwards as he placed a hand under his chin. "Issei-sama, are you in denial?" "No," he said, a bit too loudly for his own liking, I'm a man of science, Kiki. I can't just close my eyes and say, oh, God is real, heaven and hell are real, and humans have souls. There are far too many problems arising from the declaration of those facts. If hell is real, and souls are to be sent there to burn and torture for all eternity, that is a problem. It is. Yes. He yelled, drawing some few concerned stares his direction. The concept of hell is ridiculous. It would be to imply that souls which are hypothetically supposed to a spiritual conception are capable of feeling physical pain. How do you burn a soul? At that point, many people were edging away from the teen, and some had already begun to flip their phones out to call for an emergency service if needed. Fire is the rapid oxidation of material in the exothermic chemical process of combustion, and flames consist primarily of carbon dioxide, water vapor, oxygen and nitrogen. How do these physical elements harm a soul? That would be to suggest or imply that the soul is made up of elements which are susceptible to detriment by flames, in which case, the soul isn't spiritual. the boy said, before palming his face and letting out a deep sigh. That is not even to go into the moral ramifications of hell. Eternity is a long time. The human mind cannot even conceptualize eternity because we would be reaching past quintillions and sextillions of years and we still wouldn't be close. To punish a serial killer or a sex offender for infinity would be the same as locking up a 6-year-old girl in a maximum security federal penitentiary for 98 years because she shoplifted an Oreo. He then began to rub his eyes. Even heaven isn't any better. Being punished for all eternity is horrible, but being told to enjoy for all eternity. Eternal pleasure and bliss. I can barely go 2 weeks just eating great stuff and having fun before I'm bored out of my mind. I can't imagine my soul being forced to live through septillions and octillions of years being happy. Unless they find some way to compress the passage of time to make a nonillion years feel like a second, and even then, it doesn't come close to the vast length of eternity. The scientist let out a bland sigh. Why did everything become so horrible, Kiki? I was content to believe that when I died, it would be a complete cessation of existence. Bleak. Sure, but it beats the alternative of an afterlife, of the unrealized horrors of eternal life. But now I know there's the possibility of me suffering for octillions and nonillions of years, all on the whim of some god. The boy clenched his fist. No way am I letting that happen. Kiki, despite being an artificial intelligence program, could not help but feel a sense of foreboding at those 7 words. Issei-sama. What are you planning? There was the slow, heavy chuckle of a teen that Kiki had grown to fear. First, I need data. I'm going to research. Angels, devils, spirits, zombies, all of them. I will put them on my table and I will dissect them, study them, their inner workings, their chemical makeup, their biological components and weaknesses, everything. The teen's eyes regained a powerful spark to them. Then, I will capture God. And I will put God on my table and smile as my scalpels dig deep until I become the man who finds out where God came from. Kiki could only remain silent as Issei then stretched his hands out. And then, I will strip everything down. Heaven, hell, the afterlife. I will stand and watch as those insults to the transiency of human life are ultimately demolished. Until there are no devils, no angels and no gods. Issei smiled. Only man. Heavy, thick silence radiated as Haidu Issei cast his gaze up unto the skies and made out his declaration. Mummy, why is that creepy man talking to himself and smiling? Just don't look him in the eye, son, the police will take care of him soon. Issei's left eye twitched. Kiki, edit those 2 out when I ask you to play my grand dialogue about my questionable plan to destroy heaven and hell, will you please? Anything for you, Issei-sama. Thanks, Kiki. Now, onwards. To capture a fine specimen and conduct highly inappropriate experiments on it in the name of science. Large, heavy grumbles echoed out like the fat moaning of 2 whales in intercourse. Right after lunch. Excuse me, I remember quite specifically asking for a Pepsi with my fries and chicken. A Pepsi. This is a Coke Zero, not a Pepsi. And don't try to be a smartass telling me they're basically the same thing. If you were meant to be a smartass, you wouldn't be working at KFC to begin with. You know what? Never mind. Just get me a coffee instead. Yes, a coffee. No, I do not want tea, you bloody English wanker, I want coffee. What's with you British people and tea? You didn't even create it, you just ripped it off from China and now it's like your national food or something. Oh, you better not have spat in this. If I find out you spat in this, I will take my sweet time tracing your family tree, your brother, your sister, your father and mother, your grandmother and even your damn third cousins, and I will turn them all into coffee beans and make an unorthodox donation to Starbucks. Oh, what's that? The coffee is too cold. You want to give me a warmer one? Why thank you. Haidu Issei whistled a soft jaunty tune as he sat down and stared at his meal in happiness, ignoring the absolutely goddamn terrified looks of the people around him. Issei-sama is scary when he gets hungry. I have no idea as to what you're talking about, Kiki. This the 3rd time I've had to jam communication systems to prevent civilians from reporting you to the police, Issei-sama. What? He was going to call the cops. He was the one who spat in my coffee. And you threatened to cannibalize his entire family for it. But I didn't and I won't. It would be a waste of time creating a device that micro-sized and converted the complex human cell structure into that of a coffee bean. It would be much easier to just get him fired. Fired? You'd make him lose his job, Issei-sama. Oh, no, I meant literally fired. I'd drug him and have him shipped to Afghanistan under the guise of a homosexual prostitute carrying illegal contraband of yaoi porn. His fate will meet with a firing squad. Issei paused halfway through his chicken lap. Or he may just be beheaded instead. They probably won't want to waste their bullets. Issei-sama is really scary when he's hungry. The scientist took a calm sip of his coffee, allowing an almost pleasurable smile to come upon his face at the quality of the brew, and then giving a long, satisfied sigh as he could practically feel the caffeine begin to work its magic on his body. It was a bit of a hassle, altering his own body chemistry to allow for the maximum use of his metabolism, and then modifying his own metabolic rate to go above and beyond that of what could be considered human and normal. When he ate, food was immediately broken down into its constituent minerals and components, and these minerals and components were immediately distributed around his body in the most efficient manner possible. It ensured that he never got fat because he considered being obese to be a large detriment to his day-to-day life and activities, and it also made it so he never truly needed to use the restroom, which he considered another detriment to day-to-day life. Any excess of minerals was stored, processed, and then used to provide more energy and stamina, thereby also cutting down how fast he got tired and exhausted, and consequently meaning that he only required about 2 to 3 hours of sleep a day. It was for that reason that despite just having endured a long 12-hour journey from Japan to London and subsequently escaping and evading its secret service, Issei was still sitting upright rather than possessing the eyes of a man who had seen death knock on his door with a large twisted side. The downside, however, was that he had a ravenous appetite. He was essentially a bottomless pit when he ate, so he never actually got full, which meant that he was technically always hungry but was able to ignore this hunger and function normally. However, when his hunger did reach a point in which he could not handle, it growled aggressively and oftentimes had the side effect of making him more cranky. The young teen let out a large, satisfied burp as he completed his meal and then proceeded to pat his stomach, which, despite the amount of food he had made vanish, remained entirely flat. Alright. Now that we've completed that, brring. Issei rose an eyebrow. Hello? Issei-kun. Ha-chan. Please tell me you don't have anything to do with Harry Potter becoming the most wanted man in England. Issei coughed awkwardly. Really, Issei-kun? You had one thing to do, Issei-kun. One thing. Just go out there, meet Irina-chan, and hit it off. How did you end up making Harry Potter a terrorist? It just happened, Ka-chan. There was the sound of a heavy sigh over the phone. In any case, how's Irina-chan? I haven't actually gotten to meet her yet. What? Why? Well, I had Kiki hack the MI6 computers to find her, which was what caused the entire Harry Potter incident in the first place, and I ended up finding something else. Something I still can't quite believe. Issei-kun, what did I tell you about getting distracted whenever you're with your gadgets? Ha-san. God is real. There was a heavy bit of silence over the phone. Well, of course he is. I wouldn't have such an amazing son if it weren't for him after all. Issei palmed his face. I think you're missing the point, Ka-san. No, I'm not. She said sternly. I may not always look like it, Issei-kun, but I've always believed, in one way or another. When I would wake up and look at my cute little boy who would stand in university theaters and go to advanced science expositions, who would be personally invited by prime ministers and presidents alike, I knew, a part of me knew, that you were a precious gift to me, Issei-kun. A gift from something beyond anything I could ever begin to imagine. So, I have always believed, Issei-kun. Issei rubbed his cheek, not trusting himself to do anything else. In any case, your father says that if you find an angel, you should take a picture for him in a swimsuit. Wait, no more, dear, would you kindly like to tell me what you want a picture of an angel in a swimsuit for? Isn't your lovely beautiful wife enough, Issei merely chuckled. And you, young man, whether or not there is a god or not, you better get that posterior of yours into high gear and find Irina-chan. She's part of the church, isn't she? She might even shed some more light on the matter, and you'll actually listen to her without thinking she's crazy. It's just perfect. He strangely agreed. Irina was with the church, and apparently, not with the church in the manner he had assumed, as some form of cleric or nun, who had pointlessly wasted their entire lives in an empty dedication to a non-existent entity. She might even be an exorcist, in which it would provide him with the perfect chance to meet with a devil or demon and capture them. He could already feel his mouth begin to salivate at the prospect of being the first man to conduct scientific research on otherworldly creatures. Fine, I'll find her. Good. And the next time I call, there better be the voice of a nice young lady on the other end for me to listen to. The phone call disconnected, leaving Issei musing alone to himself in his seat at the restaurant. So time to hunt down my old childhood friend. I wonder how life has been treating her so far. Well, she did look good, quite grown and developed. Kiki, I need you to run that video recording of Irina again. Issei-sama, you're not planning on masturbating to her again, are you? What? That's preposterous. To even begin to assume that I would debase myself to such a pitiful level in which I would sexually stimulate myself to images of my childhood cruel friend Kiki, I expected more from you. That's great and all to hear, Issei-sama, but if you're not planning on doing what I think, why are we heading towards the restroom? Thus bring up the damn video, Kiki. It was surprisingly easy for people to forget that great men, no matter how fanciful or how grandiose their names had become or how magnificent their legends had twisted throughout time, were still men. Be it Adam, or be it Gandhi, be it Queen Esther, or be it Mother Teresa, all of them were human. They had possessed their flaws, their insecurities, their vices, their little thoughts of doubt, their moments of pain, their moments of triumph. All of them were inherently flawed. Issei had no delusions to even believe for even a second that he would be any different, that he would be someone who would use his intellect to advance beyond those tiny flaws and therefore become an inherently perfect individual. Or at least, that was what he told himself while he whacked off to Irina's sexy ass anyway. There were also other ways he could justify himself if anyone ever felt the need to consider his actions as somewhat deplorable. All he would open his mouth and say would be the two words, King Solomon. King Solomon, famed and recognized for being one of the wisest men to ever walk the earth, was the man whose greatest sin had been his extremely grandiose lust, and he had been a pervert like no other. King Solomon, the wisest man in the world, was also known in order circles as the original Harem King. Truly, what did it say that the man who had been blessed with supernatural wisdom beyond that conceivable by any other mortal man had decided to amass a harem of at least 300 wives and 700 concubines? This was, arguably, the wisest man in history, and his flaw, his greatest and most incorruptible vice, was the fact that he had loved women and sex far, far too much. Was it to be interpreted that Solomon had been wise enough to understand the true beauty and nature behind the feminine form, to understand the fleeting transiency of human life, and had dedicated himself to filling his every moment with beautiful mounds of breasts, of naked bodies and of pleasurable intercourse? Or was it to be viewed that the wisest and most powerful of men were mere unwitting slaves to the form and pleasure that was derived from being with their counterparts, that women possessed this inherent desire to enchant, fulfill and complete them? The wisest man in the world would go against God, all for a woman. If that did not drive home the point that the feminine form was a thing to be feared, revered and sought after, nothing would. Nothing you say will justify the fact that you just masturbated in a KFC bathroom. Issei-sama. Issei walked outside of the restaurant and coughed into his hand. Initiate code Euro Zeta. Issei-sama, you wouldn't. Activate memory cleanse. Time frame, 30 minutes. Initiate full system reboot on completion. There was a pause. Issei-sama. When did you finish eating your meal? And, when did we get outside? That was ages ago. Kiki, keep up. I might need to upgrade your random access memory to 8 exabytes when next I have the chance. It seems you're running slowly on just one. Ooh, that's mean. Issei-sama. I have the fastest operating system in the world. Well, let's test that theory, shall we? Irina, should you find her? Hi. Leave it to me. Issei-sama, I'll find her. And no. It was rare that Issei felt any form of concern for his AI, and even though he knew that there was nothing that would and could truly harm her, considering he had numerous amounts of backups of her central program, he couldn't help but feel slightly concerned at the sharp static noise that it immediately radiated from his mobile device. Kiki? Truth be told, his biggest concern with Kiki would be that she would completely take over the internet and lead to some form of doomsday-level scenario with her powers. Though he did have a long list of contingencies to prevent that from happening, it was a scenario that would be extremely annoying to deal with. One would argue as to why he didn't just give his AI a perverted personality, and the truth was that he had. However, when Kiki started using her abilities to hack into private phones of celebrities or record people whilst they were naked and show him the videos for his amusement, he had no choice but to deactivate that particular personality program. He hadn't deactivated it because he was a decent or honorable person, nor had he done it because he felt he was invading on their privacy. Oh no, he couldn't care less about the moral etiquette. He had disabled it solely because what he saw, it was too much. Till today, Issei had not quite forgotten the day when Kiki had hacked into the personal computer of a hot teenage girl and then spurned him with the idea of beating it off to her. He had been hesitant at first, but then grew excited as he watched her undress from the view of her webcam, only to freeze as his eyes came upon large, horrifying scars that littered her back and legs. There was no explaining how utterly filthy he felt when he discovered that she was a victim of domestic assault. His attempts at cleansing his conscience had included eventually anonymously reporting the case and providing supporting evidence. Still, no matter how he had ultimately saved that girl's life, saved her from her trauma, and no matter how he argued that if it were not for him, she would have continued to suffer, it didn't quite make him feel any less like filth. That was when he had noticed the pattern. Tough, impeccable girls who acted like hard asses were struggling deeply to maintain a facade, and cute innocent girls who you believed couldn't hurt a fly were the types that would dress up in leather and were virulent nymphomaniacs. The kind smiling policeman was actually a hidden serial killer, and the angry-looking biker with a dragon tattoo was in fact a big softie who slept with a teddy bear and nightlight. People, the true nature of people, it revealed themselves when they believed they were alone, when they thought that there was no one watching them. Issei had seen it and come to one sharp realization. It was ugly. Broken messes, secret incestuous relationships, marital assaults, domestic abuse problems, hidden drug problems and addictions, sickening fetishes. Issei truly did not want to see any of it. Not ever again. So, he stuck to cat videos. And hentai. Tons and tons of hentai. Strictly for research purposes, of course. The fact that he needed to watch copious amounts of hentai to write a thesis on the evolution of art style in the Japanese adult animation history was just a silent bonus. Not that he'd ever admit that to anyone, or out loud for that matter. Sorry Issei-sama, something seems to be jamming my search. His mind was drawn from his reminiscing slowly as he blinked. Then, Kiki's words registered in his mind and he stared in disbelief. I designed you to have access to every single satellite in orbit, and if you wanted to, you could cause them to short circuit and rain down to the Earth like meteors in the apocalypse. You can instantly crash the stock market and completely negate the currency of every country in the world at the push of a button. You can hijack cars and airplanes and even gain the nuclear launch codes to the world powers and cause World War III in a matter of minutes. So tell me, what in the world could possibly be jamming your signal? When he had told his mother that Kiki had pseudo-godlike control over all forms of technology, he had not been exaggerating. Not in the slightest. Its interference like an electromagnetic pulse, but being distributed at subtle frequencies not unlike radio waves. Issei-sama, the source, it's getting closer. Issei rose an eyebrow. How close? It's 432. His phone fell out of his hand, crashing into the ground and immediately scattering into a mess of parts, just as he felt someone bump into him. I'm so sorry. Issei's eyes flickered from his crashed phone, which was his major means of communication with Kiki, as well as his only means of finding Arena, and then turned his gaze instead to the young girl in front of him. His mind had already began whirling 1,000 miles a minute. Blonde hair, blue eyes, 150 centimeters, 4 feet 11 inches, dressed in unusual garb that made her look as though she was just coming from a Harry Potter convention. Her voice was soft, her manner of speaking elegant, her posture however, was shaky, uncertain. Her mind was clearly preoccupied with something, which was also the reason she had failed to take note of where she was going. Still, rather than mentioning any of these things, Issei gave her a bland look. I thought it was Dorothy that got lost, not the witch. Her form immediately went rigid. Excuse me? I'm not an expert on fashion, but I think the large blue witch's hat, the robes, and the cape easily classifies you as a witch. Then there is the rather wonderful coincidence that you happened to stumble across me just when Kiki felt something jamming her systems, and whilst I question my sanity at the prospect of believing that witches are real, I'm about to suspend my disbelief and just assume that you are in fact a witch. The young blonde girl opened her mouth and then closed it and then opened it again. Issei to his part, unabashedly, grabbed the girl's cape, taking it up to his nose and taking a quick whiff. What are you? He then carried the girl's hat, taking another whiff of it before biting softly at the edges, causing the girl in question to turn flustered. What are? He made to reach for her robes and she leapt back, face slightly red. What are you doing? You smell and taste normal for a witch. No, you taste more like a teenage girl than a witch. Perfumes, sanitizers, numerous amounts of cooking spices, detergent and nothing out of the ordinary. No smell of cauldrons or pots, or any form of brews, no remnants of any materials that my taste buds are unable to identify. You were tasting me? Oh yes. I needed to confirm if there was anything off or perhaps I made a wrong logical leap and you are just an ordinary girl in a witch's outfit. Unlikely considering that your name is Lafay Pendragon. The girl's eyes immediately widened and she took a step back, her body language immediately becoming hostile and worried. How did you? You stitched your name into the bottom part of your hat. I ran my tongue across the letters when I bit into it earlier. He said as though it was the most obvious thing in the world, before sighing and rubbing his temples. Considering how you reacted when I mentioned your name, I assume you really are a witch. But Lafay Pendragon? Really? Jesus fucking Christ, if it weren't for me being consciously aware that I did not ingest any hallucinogenic drugs, I'd believe I was high right now. He then blinked and stared at her. Considering how you look too damn cute to be real, I'm beginning to suspect that might actually be the case. The girl's face immediately turned red. Issei-kun, Issei palmed his face. For heaven's sakes, you have a face and body that would easily put A-list actresses to shame. Why in the world are you stuttering when someone calls you cute? You should have heard that at least 1,000,000 times over by now. Well, I haven't really. How could you not have? Issei's mind came to a slow stop. Lafay Pendragon. The House of Pendragon. Pendragon as in, the last name of the legendary King Arthur, and the House of Pendragon as in, his direct heirs and or relatives. The same Pendragons that were said to be under the protection of the Golden Dawn. Protection, however, was a rather questionable term. What were they being protected from? Enemies of Arthur? Descendants of enemies of Arthur? And this protection, at what cost was it delivered? He could tell immediately. In Haidu Issei's vision, words lit up as his eyes dashed back and forth all over the girl's form. Homeschooled. Sheltered. Happy. Enthusiastic. Polite. Optimistic. Kind. Generous. Caring. Prone to attachment. Innocent. Naive. Issei waved off the words from his vision, scowling as the last one stood, bright and most clear amongst others. Shush. I'm trying to ignore the compulsion to open your pretty sheltered eyes to the harsh realities of the world before you go out there and get your heart broken, or worse, get yourself killed. Don't say anything, just stand there and scowl. She blinked at him, staring strangely. I said scowl. You're not scowling. No one's ever told me that before. Issei rolled his eyes. Of course they haven't. Most people are afraid to speak their mind for fear of being ostracized, mocked or ridiculed. And you're not. I'm not what? Afraid? Of being ostracized or mocked? No. He said plainly. When I was younger, maybe, but I made a promise to my mother. I would never lie. I would be true about my thoughts, about myself. I would express myself as honestly as I could, and whether people accepted it or not, it was their business. The girl, curious, stared at him. So you don't lie? I don't lie. Never. Not when it matters. He admitted. I can joke around and divert the truth once in a while, but I don't explicitly lie. There was a strange, lofty silence that held for a few more seconds. Oh, by the way, I may need to take you to a lab and conduct a series of invasive experiments on you to discover if you really do have reality warping abilities that you call magic. Then, that strange lofty silence immediately veered off into a silent, uncomfortable one. What? End of the part 1. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.